The devil is attacking you. And if you don't know how he attacks you, then you will fall to his temptations. You will fall to his attacks every single time, because we are in a spiritual battle. And I say this all the time. If you don't know that you're in a spiritual battle, and if you don't know the weapons that are coming against you, then you're more likely to fall. But if you know how the other person attacks, if you know how the other person, tries to, or the enemy tries to, attack you, then you'll be more likely to win those battles. And so that's why it's important that you know the ways that the enemy tries to get you to fall into temptation, fall away from God, because if you don't, then you'll end up falling away. And so that's why in this video, I'll be talking about the 5 ways that the devil actually attacks you, so that you know what's coming when the devil tries to tempt you. And he does this all the time. Matter of fact, the devil doesn't even tempt you with your desires. I know that many people think that, when we get a certain desire to go and do something, that's the enemy, that's the devil tempting us. But in reality, temptation actually comes from our own desires. Because if you think about it, if you don't desire to smoke weed, or if you don't desire to go to parties, the devil's not going to send people your way to, pass you a blunt or try to get you to go to a party. He's not going to do that. He's going to tempt you with the things that he knows that you desire. So like maybe lust. Like if he knows that you want to give in to lust, then guess what? He's going to tempt you in that area. If he knows that you want to smoke weed, he's going to send people your way to try to, give you some weed and different stuff like that. So that's why it's important that you watch what you desire and your desires align with God's will. And you do that simply by spending time with God, renewing your mind and spending time with God, and asking God to cleanse your heart so you don't want to do the things of this world. And then that's when you'll be able to overcome that desire. But the first way that the enemy actually attacks you with those desires, to make that desire come to life, make that desire, make it more intense, make it more like harder for you to not give into that temptation. The one thing he does to get you to give into that desire is intrusive thoughts. That's the first thing, the first way the enemy gets you, because the way that the enemy gets you is through your mind first. If you're not winning that battle in the mind, then the devil will have you every single time. That's why the word says in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, that we need to renew our mind. We need to renew our mind, make it new, so that we can, actually carry out God's will. Because if the devil is continuing to win this battle in our mind, he's continuing to send these intrusive thoughts and you're letting it resonate in your heart, that is when you will end up falling to them temptations. And what I mean by that is, say you get an intrusive thought of lust, and you see a woman and you get that intrusive thought and the enemy says, to look at her in an inappropriate way. Well, if you meditate on that thought that the enemy gives you, meaning you really think about it and you continue to look and gaze your eyes at that woman, then it's going to end up going into your heart. And when it goes into your heart, that's when the desire actually starts to, intensify. So the devil doesn't know. The devil doesn't intensify that desire. You actually intensify that desire by meditating on what the devil actually attacks you with. And so that's why it's important that you know that the enemy attacks you that way. Because also, if you don't know that intrusive thoughts are attacks from the enemy, then you will feel guilty and shameful about getting that thought. And the enemy does that too. He'll give you an intrusive thought and then tell you you're not worthy of God because you're thinking these certain things. And so that's why it's important that you know these weapons. And once you know these weapons, you can actually fight them with the truth. So when you get that lustful thought, Matthew chapter 5, verse 28 tells us, whoever looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery in the heart. So we'll know not to give in to that temptation, and we'll know to take captive of every single thought and make it obedient to Christ. And so that's why it's important to meditate on the word, so that you know these verses in the back of your mind. So when the enemy attacks you with these things, you'll be ready. And the second way that the enemy attacks you is the people around you. You see, it's kind of similar to intrusive thoughts, except people are actually saying and peer pressuring you to give in to your old ways, to give in to your old sinful nature. And so that's why it's important that you watch who is around you. Even Jesus had people close to him where he had to, I rebuke you, Satan, or get behind me, Satan. He said that to Peter because the devil was trying to use the people around him to try to steer Jesus off of his calling, to make him feel like, sad and not want to die on the cross for our sin, not to fulfill, the prophecies that were told. And also, it may not seem like those people are doing bad in your life. They may seem like they have good intentions, because if you think about Peter was like, no, you can't leave, Jesus. You can't go fulfill your will. You can't leave us. Those things won't happen to you. And Jesus had to rebuke him. And Peter probably thought he was doing good. He probably thought he was like, oh, I don't want Jesus to leave. I don't want those bad things to happen, because that would be the better option. Well, the enemy will do the same thing. He doesn't just make it plain and obvious that he's there. He's not, this red devil, this red creature with horns. No, the devil disguises himself as an angel of light. So he comes as if he's doing good. He comes as a good friend. And then all of a sudden, that's when you get backstabbed. That's when you end up straying away from your calling, because they're just distracting you. They're just tempting you. And so that's why it's important that you watch their fruits. Watch the people's fruits around you. See what they're tempting you to do. See if they are trying to knock you off of God's calling, influencing you to knock you off of God's calling, or what God has put on your heart. And if they are, then you should probably watch out for them and cut them off, because it's important that you watch them and know your identity in Christ, so that you don't get it knocked off of God's path and you don't lose that battle against the enemy. The third way that the enemy attacks you, and it gets a lot of people, is distractions. He gets you with distractions. The reason why, a lot of marriages fall apart is because, guess what? They're distracted with the things around them. The reason why, you stop reading your word and you don't get into your word no more is because you're distracted with social media. It's like you don't even want to read the word no more, because guess what? You get bored, and you want to scroll on social media, and you want to, just chill and let your mind just, I guess, not think about anything, not do anything. And the more that the enemy can get you to consume that content and, consume, the distractions, the more that he can push you away from God's calling, because he can't stop you from, reaching God's calling or fulfilling God's calling. Only you can do that. And so what the enemy will do, he will send things your way to get you off of God's calling. He can't make you move the opposite direction of God, but he can influence you. And once you listen to the devil's influence and don't listen to God, that's exactly when the devil has won the battle. And so it's so important that you stay focused and that you take social media fast. You take breaks from social media. You start meditating on God's word. Wake up early in the morning and actually start creating good habits. Because if you don't learn how to balance, social media, different things like that, then you will never be able to fulfill God's calling. And so the enemy will distract you as much as possible, as long as possible. And then you're going to wonder why I can't feel God's presence anymore. Then you're going to wonder why, I don't know. I don't want to read the word anymore. I don't want to spend time with God anymore. It's because you're consuming this content that brings you away from God. And in reality, if you get distracted for too long, it's actually a sin. The word tells us in James chapter 4 that if you know what you ought to do, and yet you don't do it, then it is a sin. So if you know that you're supposed to be doing God's calling, or you're supposed to be reading the word, or you're supposed to be spending time with God, and yet you're scrolling on your phone, you're scrolling on social media, then you have actually sinned against God. Procrastinating on, spending time with God is actually a sin. And I had to learn that, and that actually motivated me to, put down the phone, put down the social media scrolling, and go spend time with God, instead of, thinking it's all good, thinking it's all okay, just to scroll on social media and then forget to spend time with God. But you have to take it serious if you really want to stop and really want to focus on God's will. And number 4, the fourth way that the enemy attacks you is the open doors. The only way that the enemy can actually attack you is through open doors. And I mentioned this earlier in the video when I said, with the intrusive thoughts, he will attack you, yes, with the intrusive thought, but then once you open that door, that's when the seed actually starts to grow in your heart. That's when that passion, that intense desire to go and sin actually starts to happen. Is when you allow those intrusive thoughts, when you consume too much content that you're not supposed to, when you're looking at a woman with lust or a man with lust for too long. That's when that passion, that desire starts to intensify. And so that's why it's important that you close every single door. Make sure you're not consuming too much, secular music. Make sure you're not consuming too much, bad content, because if you don't balance it, then you'll end up falling into those temptations. And that's the only way that the enemy can attack you. And number 5, the last way that the enemy actually attacks you is he attacks your fleshly desires. And so the only way we can overcome this attack is living by the Spirit. Living by the Spirit is doing what the Spirit wants you to do instead of what your flesh wants to do. So if your flesh wants to consume content, then you feed the Spirit. If you want to, eat some desserts that or consume too much food, then you start to fast, and you basically do the opposite of what your flesh wants to do. And as you continue to kill your flesh, then that's when the Spirit takes over, and you no longer even want to do the things that feed the flesh, because that's going to be harder. You have to realize that once we start feeding our spirit more, once we start actually killing our flesh, it starts to get easy to walk in the Spirit because our spirit is so strong. But as soon as we stop feeding our spirit, that's when the fleshly desires can start to come in. And so we have to remain consistent in our walk with Christ, and so that we don't get attacked with those fleshly desires. So yes, I know this video is kind of long, but I pray that you can use these tips. I hope that they edified you so that you can go out there and start winning those battles against the enemy. I'm definitely gonna make a part 2 to this, and so if you want to see that, make sure you stay around. But I appreciate you for watching. I do appreciate all the support. I appreciate everyone who supported with the link down below. But again, appreciate y'all for watching, and until next time, as usual, y'all stay blessed.